let's unpack this. How do you take a group of um, homesick, impoverished refugees who literally just fled for their lives and use them to build an enduring empire of faith?
Well, you definitely don't start with borders, and you certainly don't start with an army. You
Yeah.
start by completely rewiring how human beings relate to one another.
Welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. We are setting out on a truly profound mission today, diving into a vast body of historical accounts.
Yeah, we're exploring the life of Prophet Muhammad, which is framed in these incredible texts as the legacy of the greatest man who ever lived.
It really is. And specifically, we are zooming in on the legendary Medinan period. We're looking at a narrative that is just absolutely breathtaking in its scope.
It traces how a persecuted, fractured group managed to build a thriving, unified state, a state whose foundations still resonates with billions of people today.
It's just massive.
Yeah.
And the era carries immense emotional weight. The historical records we're unpacking, they aren't just dry lists of dates.
No, not at all. They describe a deeply awe-inspiring period of immense sacrifice, profound sentiment, and really a monumental shift in human civilization.
Exactly. To understand Medina during this time is to understand the very blueprint of a new society.
Yeah,
So let's unpack that blueprint.
let's do it.
Because before you can build the physical structures of a new state, you have to build a shared identity. The prophet arrives in the city of Medina, and he immediately launches into 4 foundational projects.
Right. He builds the central mosque, the masjid. He forges a brotherhood between the Meccan immigrants and the Medinan locals.
And he draws up a revolutionary document known as the Covenant. Plus, he begins forming a defense strategy.
But I actually want to pause on that second project you mentioned, the brotherhood.
Yeah, what did that actually look like in practice? Because it sounds nice on paper, but, in reality.
It was entirely unprecedented, both then and now. The historical accounts call the Meccan immigrants the Muhajirun, those who migrated, and the Medinan locals are the Ansar, the helpers. The prophet didn't just ask the locals to be hospitable or polite. He instituted a literal, legally binding brotherhood.
Wait, really? Legally binding?
Yes, you had immigrants who arrived with absolutely nothing, having left all their wealth behind in Mecca. The locals of Medina were asked to permanently pair up with an immigrant.
Oh, wow.
This meant legally sharing their homes, splitting their agricultural land, and in the beginning, even sharing inheritance rights as if they were blood relatives.
Okay, imagine a modern city asking its residents to, legally split their bank accounts and property deeds with incoming refugees. That is an astonishing ask.
It really is. But it worked. It completely eradicated the immediate crisis of poverty and homelessness. It created an unbreakable social fabric.
Which brings us to his next project, right? The Covenant of Medina. I look at this document and think of it like a highly evolved early constitution.
That's a great way to look at it. It is widely considered one of the most advanced political documents of the ancient world.
It united people based on faith and shared citizenship rather than bloodlines. But, we need to understand how massive a paradigm shift that was for the Arab tribes at the time.
Oh, to understand the weight of this, you have to understand ancient tribalism.
Yeah.
In 7th century Arabia, your tribe was your only insurance policy.
Right, no police force to call.
Exactly. If you didn't have blood ties to a strong tribe, you had 0 legal rights. Someone could kill you, and there would be no consequences because no one would avenge you.
So your bloodline was your entire existence.
Yes, and the covenant completely shattered that framework. It declared that citizenship, a shared commitment to the state, was the new bond.
So, what does this all mean for the existing residents of Medina? Because the city had a large established population, particularly several Jewish tribes. Was this new identity an imposition?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it wasn't an imposition at all, and that is the political genius of the covenant. It was a remarkably tolerant integration. The document explicitly granted the Jewish tribes of Medina full citizenship, religious freedom, and state protection. They were allowed to govern themselves and worship entirely according to their own teachings.
Okay, so it was a mutual agreement.
Exactly. The primary condition was mutual defense. If Medina was attacked from the outside, they would all defend it together.
That's fascinating. He didn't rule by force, but by integration, treating diverse groups as equal citizens, even though, relations would later strain due to political friction.
Right, but the foundation was mutual respect. At the same time, he was carefully cultivating a distinct identity for his own followers.
Because they were living alongside these Jewish and Christian communities, often referred to as the people of the book. So he wanted to establish specific traditions.
Yes, and a great example of this is the fasting on the day of Ashura.
Right. The texts note that when the prophet arrived, he observed the Jewish tribes fasting on the 10th of the month of Muharram.
And when he asked why, they explained it was to celebrate God saving Moses from the Pharaoh.
And the prophet's response was just beautiful. He said, Moses belongs to us more than he belongs to you, acknowledging Moses as a deeply revered fellow prophet.
He instructed the Muslims to fast on that day in shared reverence. But to keep their practice distinct, he added that they should also fast on the 9th.
It was a brilliant way to honor a shared theological history while maintaining a unique communal identity. He also declared the entire city of Medina a sacred sanctuary, a haram.
Meaning absolute physical and spiritual safety. You couldn't chop down trees, you couldn't hunt, and you absolutely couldn't draw weapons within its boundaries.
But, while that political framework sounds incredibly smooth on paper, the human reality for these early believers was heartbreakingly difficult.
It was a trauma. The migration from Mecca to Medina, known as the Hijra, wasn't just a relocation.
Exactly. I was reading about the migration, and the name Suhaib jumped out at me. What actually happened to him?
Suhaib's story is the ultimate embodiment of sacrifice. He was a former slave who had grown up among the Romans. He eventually gained his freedom and, through sheer brilliance and hard work, became a highly successful, wealthy merchant in Mecca.
But then it was time to leave.
Right. When the time came to migrate to Medina, a Meccan mob intercepted him. They basically told him, you came to our city as a broke foreigner, you got rich off our economy, you can leave, but your wealth stays.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Imagine you have spent your entire life clawing your way out of slavery to build a fortune, and a mob demands all of it.
And he doesn't even hesitate. He literally buys his own freedom to worship with his life savings.
He tells the mob exactly where all his hidden wealth is located.
Gives them every single penny just so they will let him walk away with nothing but his life and his faith.
He arrived in Medina utterly destitute. But when the prophet saw him, he smiled and told Suhaib that his transaction had been the most profitable trade of all.
It is awe-inspiring. But bring yourself into the shoes of someone like Suhaib. You give up your life savings, you endure this exhausting desert migration, you finally make it to this new sanctuary.
And what greets you? A swamp.
Yes, early Medina was an agricultural oasis, but it was incredibly marshy and plagued by a severe malarial fever.
It's easy to look at history as just names and dates, but these were real people suffering. You have towering figures of early Islam, men like Abu Bakr and Bilal, struck down by this intense fever.
They were delirious, sweating through this agonizing illness, reciting poetry about death, and weeping with intense homesickness for the dry, mountainous air of Mecca.
So how did the prophet's prayer actually change their reality? Because they were at a psychological breaking point.
The narrative presents this as a profound moment of divine intervention. Seeing the immense suffering, the prophet made a deeply emotional dua, a prayer.
He asked God to make the believers love Medina as much as they loved Mecca, or even more.
And he specifically prayed for the fever to be driven out and for the land to be healed. The texts describe a miraculous transformation following that prayer.
The sickness literally lifted from the city.
And more importantly, the psychological weight vanished. Their hearts were fundamentally changed. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, that legendary result is still felt today.
Wait, really? To this day?
Absolutely. Pilgrims report it all the time. Mecca is a city of immense, towering mountains. It imposes a feeling of heavy, magnificent gravity.
Right, you feel small.
But Medina is completely flat. When you approach Medina, the feeling that overwhelmingly washes over believers is an inexplicable, profound tranquility, a deep peace.
That is just beautiful. That profound spiritual aura didn't just comfort the sick followers, though. As the sickness lifted, new life began to bloom in the state.
Literally.
Yeah, I was reading about the first baby born in this new Islamic state, a boy named Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr.
Born to asthma. That birth was celebrated with an intensity that is hard to overstate.
The narrative is so touching. When the baby is born, they bring him straight to the prophet. The prophet takes a date, chooses to make a soft paste, and places it gently into the newborn's mouth.
The believers erupted in celebration. This was the first child born in Islam. To them, seeing a new generation begin, that signified the true beginning of their society.
It was proof of life. But this internal growth wasn't happening in a vacuum, right? Scholars from other faiths were watching closely.
Which brings us to Abdullah bin Salam. He was widely recognized as the most learned, highly respected Jewish rabbi in the entire city of Medina.
I love this encounter. The rabbi hears about this man claiming to be a prophet, so he goes to see him, and his immediate reaction is incredibly telling.
He says, "I looked at his face, and I knew this was not the face of a liar."
He essentially says that divine truth was just radiating out of him. But he's a scholar. A feeling isn't enough. He needs proof. So he gives the prophet the ultimate theological pop quiz.
He comes prepared with 3 seemingly impossible questions that only a true prophet could answer.
Okay, what were they?
He asks, what is the first sign of the day of judgment? What is the finest food the people of paradise will eat? And what is the biological cause of a child resembling the mother or the father?
Okay, I saw these in our notes, and the answers are wild. The first sign is a fire driving people from east to west. But the second one, the finest food in paradise, is the lobe of a whale's liver.
Yes.
Not exactly what I'd order at a celestial restaurant. Why was that the answer?
Well, in the rabbinical traditions of the time, the liver of a great fish, or a whale, was considered a deeply symbolic delicacy. It represented a divine feast outside normal human access.
Ah, okay, so it was obscure theological trivia to expose frauds who just guess, like honey or roasted meat.
Exactly. And for the third question, long before modern genetics, the prophet explained that whichever parent's traits or fluids were dominant would determine the child's resemblance.
This rabbi was putting his entire reputation on the line. What happened when the prophet actually answered him flawlessly?
What's fascinating here is that the rabbi doesn't hesitate. He recognizes the divine truth instantly and converts on the spot.
Wow.
But he warns the prophet, "My people are going to turn on me the second they find out."
And they instantly do. He hides in a room while the prophet asks the local leaders what they think of him. They praise him as their greatest scholar.
And then Abdullah walks out, announces he embraced Islam, and literally in the exact same breath, they start cursing him, calling him the worst among them.
It highlights the complex emotional landscape the prophet navigated. But, the resistance wasn't just from outside scholars. The believers themselves were about to face a massive, literal turning point.
A huge test of loyalty, the change of the Qibla, the direction of prayer.
Right. For the first 14 months after the Hijrah, the Muslims prayed facing Jerusalem.
But the prophet's heart longed to face the Kaaba in Mecca. Eventually, a divine revelation comes down, instructing them to instantly turn their faces toward Mecca.
And they were mid-prayer when they heard. Imagine driving down a highway and suddenly the GPS tells everyone to instantly pull a U-turn at 60 miles an hour. That requires immense trust.
It does. A man announces the change, and the congregation just turns their bodies around. It is an awe-inspiring level of obedience.
But why change the direction at all if God is everywhere?
The sources present this as a deliberate test by God to make evident who would follow the messenger. It exposed 4 distinct groups.
The pagans thought he was reverting to their ways. The hypocrites thought he was indecisive.
The Jews saw it as abandoning the true prophets. But for the believers, it separated true devotion from mere cultural habit. It proved their ultimate loyalty was to the divine command itself.
Which contrasts so wildly with his economic policies. In faith, strict obedience. But in the marketplace, total freedom.
It's an incredible dichotomy. He sets up a market in Medina, and the first rule is that it's a completely tax-free zone.
And when prices skyrocket and people beg him to fix the prices, he flat out refuses.
He says God sets the prices. He believed that the natural flow of supply and demand is part of divine providence.
Total submission in spiritual matters, but total freedom in economic ones. But building this perfectly trusting community naturally drew hostility. To protect this beautiful new state, they had to be willing to struggle for it.
This brings us to the military expeditions. And we really need to unpack this carefully, focusing purely on statecraft, defense, and the removal of oppression.
Right. Let's define the word jihad by its linguistic root.
It comes from Jude, which literally translates to exerting effort or to struggle.
And we have to trace the prophet's legendary patience here. Fighting was strictly prohibited for 13 years of violent persecution in Mecca.
Exactly. It was only permitted in Medina when they were evicted from their homes. They moved to a defensive command strictly to fight those who transgressed against them.
So what does this all mean? The narrative here is that this wasn't about aggressive conquest, but about survival, securing the state, and actually protecting freedom of worship, right?
Yes. This raises an important question about the nature of conflict in the text. The narrative establishes that all war is inherently evil except when mandated by God to stop a greater corruption.
The text explicitly mentions that if not for this defensive struggle, Monasteries, churches, synagogues, and mosques would have been demolished.
Because of this disciplined defensive struggle, the state was able to survive.
And it grew from a few hundred persecuted refugees in a swamp to a legendary community of over 114,000 believers by the Prophet's passing.
It is a breathtaking journey. This period cemented the legacy of the greatest man who ever lived, building a society rooted in faith, brotherhood, and divine justice.
It really is an unparalleled story. Which brings me to a final provocative thought I want to leave you with today. Something for you to mull over.
Let's hear it.
Think about that Medina marketplace, left completely free of taxes and price controls, because the Prophet believed that God sets the prices.
Yeah.
If the very foundation of an entire civilization's economy was built on the profound spiritual trust that the divine ultimately controls supply, demand, and our sustenance, how might that fundamentally change the way you view your own daily struggles for wealth, career, and security today?
That is a profound reflection. It really reframes our modern anxieties, doesn't it?
It really does. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.